Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rooted in Results. I am actually live today coming from Canada, and I'm Christy Lammers with Lammers Ag. So excited to be able to talk about, it's July 1st, and to have these two guests on, Paul Parcher and Hailey Hughes, to just let us know what's been happening, what we need to look for moving into the end of the growing season, or where we're at now with the growing season. And I'll let those two introduce themselves, but just want to welcome everybody to this episode that we will talk a little bit about what we're seeing and what some thoughts might be for you to think about as the crop continues to grow. So Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Parcher. I'm the technical agronomist for North Central Iowa for Channel Seed, and I support Christy.
I'm Hailey Hughes, and I am in charge of the research and data management here at Lammers Ag.
Okay, well, I'm so glad to have both of you on because I know things have been growing and you're starting to do root digs. I know we have been at Lammers Ag, and Paul, obviously you check a lot of different, fields and plots and different things as well as you look at. So as we're talking about growing season updates, Paul Parcher, who's our technical agronomist in the area in which Lammers Ag customers are, as well as, other seed pros that he works with for channel, he's going to go through a few things. Corn rootworm is one of them. And I know nitrogen management, I believe, is one of the other things that maybe you might touch on, Paul, but I'll let you go through these slides. And I guess if Hailey or I want to have questions at the end, we can wait.
Yeah, we'll get started here, and I'll kick things off with the growing season update. And going through the growing season there, I collect from April 11th to October 9th. I collect the growing degree days, or the heat units, as some people might call it, along with the precipitation for 21 locations across north central Iowa. And I've done this for a number of years. Actually, I've got over 30 years of data, and I get this data from the Iowa State Mesonet. And I take this data that I collect and I chart it out. And you can see I've got several lines on there, and you can follow through with what each one of the lines stands for. But basically, I like to track and compare what this year is doing against the 30-year, or which I call normal, the 30-year average, which that's the black hash line, compared to the 20-year average, the 10-year average, the 5-year average, and then, of course, compared to last year, because a lot of people like to know, and it's always one of the common questions is, how are we comparing to last year? Because it seems like everybody can remember what happened last year. And so I'd like to have this graphical representation of how we are doing compared to last year. And I like to compare against normal myself. So looking at compared to normal and compared to last year, 2024, our growing degree day accumulations, if you take a look at on the right-hand side, June 13th and 19th and June 20th to 26th, we see quite an increase in our heat unit accumulations. And in order for us to really jump up like that, we have to be experiencing above normal conditions to do that. So we have been quite warm the last couple of weeks. Kind of an interesting thing to me, when you take a look at June 6th to 12th, we actually fell below average, or below the 30-year average for that time frame. It's been a few years since I've seen us actually dip below average, so that was a little bit unique. But when we compare to last year, so looking at that bold red line, we're still trailing last year. So it's just kind of interesting to follow. I do the exact same thing with the precipitation data. And if you guys can remember, we were quite wet last year, and that really shows up with that bold red line. And when I take a look at the information here, you can see that we started off the growing season on the left-hand side, on the wetter side, and then we tended to dry out, and that's actually when we got the bulk of the corn and soybeans planted. But we continued on a dry spell, and then starting on really following the weeks of June 13th, June 20th to 26th, not only did we have the heat come in, but we also had more precipitation come in. We actually got quite wet during that time. So again, I follow this all the way through the growing season. It's interesting to watch this chart. I update it every week, so it's fun to watch it build week over week. So finally, the information I had on both charts is essentially summarized in this chart right here. And you can see the 21 locations that I track. You can see what the week's growing degree day accumulations and precipitation were for the various locations, and what the growing degree day accumulations and precipitation accumulations have been for the growing season. So again, the growing season I track starts on April 11th and goes through October 9th. And then finally, the growing degree day departure from normal and the precipitation departure from normal. You can see how we're tracking there. I kind of color code things as the yellowish color would be kind of average is the way I view it. Once we go over 50 growing degree days, above or below, you'll see a color change. So above will turn green and below will turn red. So we actually have all of that represented here. I do the same thing with the precipitation. So I kind of consider plus or minus 2 inches as being kind of normal. So if we're more than 2 inches for a location above normal, then that highlights in blue. And if we're below 2 inches, more than 2 inches, that turns red. And again, we have all of that represented in the chart. So for the growing season, you can see for the 21 locations, we are actually running ahead by 52 growing degree days for the growing season so far. And we're almost a half an inch of precipitation ahead of normal. So myself, when I was a little surprised by that half inch above normal, because when I take a look at the amount of rain we got and as wet as we seem to be, I would have guessed that number would have been so much higher. But really, right before the call started, I was telling Chrissy that we had a storm come through on Sunday, and a lot of places got an inch or more of rain out of that storm. And kind of coincidentally, that storm didn't hit any of my 21 locations. So it actually won't really be represented in the data much. So really, as everybody knows, with the precipitation there, it really varies from one point to the other. So you can have large variations. When it comes to growing degree days, they tend to be a little bit more similar from one location to the next. So just kind of the way I view things and the way I've seen things over the years. So Chrissy had mentioned corn rootworms, and corn rootworms is something I track on an annual basis. I really start tracking the corn rootworms starting at the beginning of the year because I want to track egg hatch. And to do that, we start out collecting the growing degree days for the corn rootworm egg development there, and that uses a base temperature of 52 degrees. And then just follow that through. And then I basically chart that out to estimate when the different parts of the life cycle of the corn rootworm are going to take place. So to kind of kick things off, I've got some pictures I just wanted to share with you. So on the top left-hand side there, we are looking at the northern corn rootworm on top, and that's the green one. And then the western corn rootworm, which is the yellow and black one that's on the bottom. Those are our two primary pests. Sometimes you might hear about the I guess I call it the spotted cucumber beetle, or it's also called the southern corn rootworm. And again, it's spotted, but that's one that has to migrate up here. And it is not considered a pest for northern Iowa in corn. So it's actually more of a pest in cucumbers and things like that. So sliding over to the next picture to the right with the penny, I've got 3 stages that are represented there, the larval, the pupal, and then the adult stage of the western corn rootworm. So you can see they're not very large in size, but when you get a lot of numbers of them out there, they can cause quite a bit of damage. And if you go down to the lower left-hand side there, you see corn plants that are lodged. And a lot of times people might think that it might be a downburst of wind or something that might have caused that. But in reality, a lot of times it's actually a hot spot, a corn rootworm that's causing that. And that's when you call myself or Christy, and and you have us come out, take a look at it, and actually see what's going on. So not only can they cause the corn plants to lodge there, but the adults can be a problem with silk feeding, and they can actually interfere with pollination. And that's one of the things I actually track when I'm charting out the corn rootworm development, is I want to see when the corn rootworm adults are going to hatch and how that matches up with when we're going to pollinate. Because if we have a whole bunch of adults that emerge before we start to tassel, we can have a large population that could invade fields that are the first ones to silk, and we can actually have a lot of silk clipping take place and interfere with the yield. So we want to really stay on top of that. So the last picture I've got is just comparing a Smart Stacks Pro root on the left-hand side compared to some Double Pro roots that have been heavily fed on by the corn rootworm. So you're talking next to no damage to pretty much complete damage that's taking place. So you can see the devastation that the corn rootworm larvae can actually do to the roots. So another chart, and I don't usually share this chart because there's usually not much happening in it, but this is the first time in my career I've actually had this particular instance happen. And so a lot of times we'll have a cold spell over the winter, and what we'll end up seeing is well, I have people comment to me that we were probably killing a lot of corn rootworm eggs, and my comment is often that no, we're probably not killing any. And they kind of look at me a little cross-eyed there, like I'm crazy, but usually at that time, we've got some snow cover that's helping blanket the ground. So this year, what was a little bit unique is that we actually had a cold spell take place when we didn't have any snow cover. So when you take a look at my chart here, I've got a red line going across 18 degrees Fahrenheit. And what's important about that number is that the research has suggested that at temperatures above 18 degrees, the Western corn rootworms are pretty much safe from really much death loss or eggs dying from cold temperatures. And then when we fall below that 18 degrees Fahrenheit, that they become more susceptible to death loss. And you can see I've got the average daily soil temperature with a yellowish line, and then a green line is the daily low temperature. And this is at the 4-inch depth. And you can see that we spent some time below that red line, and that really doesn't happen that often. And I just thought that was really interesting, because I haven't ever really seen that happen very often throughout the years, and especially to dip down that low. But then again, we had another cold spell that took place a little bit later in February, but we actually had some snow during that time. And the vertical black bars there show the amount of snowfall that we had during that time. And you can see that the temperature still maintained pretty high and really kept at 18 degrees or higher. So what's interesting to me is that when I take a look at what the average temperatures were for a 2-week period of time, when it was really the coldest at that time, the temperatures that really sunk and got deep into the soils actually averaged 1 degree below zero during that time frame, that 2-week time frame in January. But when we got to February, we actually got colder yet, and was averaging for that 2-week period 6 degrees below zero. But you see that our soil temperatures never got that cold, and that was because we had that blanket of snow protecting the soil from heat loss there, and keeping the heat in there, and actually keeping the corn rootworm eggs at temperatures that were above that 18 degrees. So this is the chart that I've got that I track everything on, and it is a super busy chart. There's a lot of things going on there. The main thing main things I'd like you to take a look at is, number one, kind of in the center, you've got a red vertical line, and I use that to kind of track where we're at. And I take a look at the various things happening towards the top there. So the EST that you see, that's just estimated, because this is all just a bunch of estimations for me. I'm just estimating when this is all taking place based on information that I've gleaned off the internet from different universities. So you can see that we're coming to the close of corn rootworm egg hatch. We're in the heart of corn rootworm larval feeding. We've started pupating, and you can see that with where the red line's at, I'm estimating that we're going to start seeing adults here really shortly. And it's kind of interesting. We actually came across our first corn rootworm adult here last Friday. So it was a little bit on the early side, which is it was surprising to me. And what was maybe even a little bit more surprising was that it was actually a northern corn rootworm adult. It seems like our population seems to lean much heavier towards westerns in this geography, but we still do have the northerns present. So once we start seeing the beetles emerge, that's we had to really start watching that and compare that to when we're going to start silking, just to make sure that we're able to maybe stay ahead of any silk feeding that may take place. But as soon as the beetles start hatching, the males tend to hatch first, and then the females follow about a week later, and then they will mate immediately. And then there's about a 2-week period, a 2-week gestational period, if you will, before the adult females will start laying eggs. So basically, from the time that we start seeing the first beetles to about 3 weeks later is when you'll start having egg laying take place. Now, it's considered that big box there on the left-hand side that's green shaded. That represents 75% of the corn rootworm eggs that are laid during this time. And the research has shown that it takes about 75% of the corn rootworm eggs are laid during a 30-day period of time. And so essentially from the beginning of August to about the beginning of September is the time frame that I'm estimating that this 75% of the eggs are going to be laid. Again, this is just an estimation, but I'd like to say it's at least an educated guess anyway. Next topic that I wanted to touch on was whether or not supplemental nitrogen will be needed. And as I mentioned before, we've had an awful lot of rain across the area, and we've had ponding and different things happening, and it's a common question that's coming up. So some of our considerations that we want to look at, and I guess I fall back on some research from Iowa State, and they got 18 years of data, and what they came up with is for like North Iowa, they found that a threshold of 15.5 inches of rain or more that's accumulated from April 1st to June 30th. Using that as a threshold, they were able to actually come up and say 76% of the time whether or not they made the correct decision to whether or not to apply nitrogen or not to apply nitrogen based on that 15.5-inch threshold. So I think that's pretty interesting. And you take a look at it, you always want to steer the odds in your favor if you can. And I think when you're dealing with Mother Nature, that if you can get odds in your favor 76% of the time based on this information, I feel pretty good about that. So it's also important to consider that there's a lot of factors to consider when it comes to nitrogen loss. And it can be anywhere from whether you're ponding or infiltration rates or how long the soil stays saturated, how wet you were beforehand. There's a lot of things to consider. And because of that, you're going to end up with different things going on with every field. So technically your decision for every field may be a little different from one field to the next. So that's going to impact what your nitrogens end up looking like and what your potential crop responses might be. So looking at these pictures there, I wanted to start off with the leaf on the left-hand side is showing typical nitrogen deficiency. It starts on the tip as yellowing, and it works its way down the midrib towards the stalk, and basically can form an inverted V look on it. But it is on the lower leaves. It starts on the lower leaves, and then it'll work its way up the plant. The middle picture is a picture I took just a couple of weeks ago, and it was showing a tile line there, and the tile line showing up as green, and then on either side of it there you see the corn's yellow, and essentially the tile line got the water away and faster, and where the corn is more yellow looking, there's a chance here that we could be dealing with some oxygen issues there. The root's not getting enough oxygen. The nitrogen could also be denitrifying there as well. So there could be nitrogen loss taking place. The picture on the right is a little bit later in the season, taking a look just down in the canopy, at the base of the canopy, seeing some pretty good nitrogen deficiencies showing up. And this is something that you do not want to see early during grain fill. If you're seeing something like this and it's toward the end of grain fill, it's not nearly as big a deal as if you're seeing this real early on in the grain fill. So you just early on in the grain fill, you would like to have your corn plants green pretty much down to the base. So as I mentioned, with the information from Iowa State, they're taking a look at April 1st through June 30th precipitation accumulations, and that is what I'm showing right here. And the area marked out in black is actually the area I support. And kind of an interesting thing that I see here is that the area with the kind of the purple diamond in it, that's actually Butler County. And you look down at the bottom, Butler County, almost the entire county is sitting in that 15 to 17 inch range for rain. So there is a good chance that Butler County itself is maybe at or exceeding that 15.5 inches of rain threshold that Iowa State was talking about. So some general recommendations, if we're dealing with adequate nitrogen, and meaning that you basically have already applied the normal amount of nitrogen that you're going to apply in a given year, and we have exceeded that 15.5 inch threshold, that you may want to apply some additional nitrogen, but don't apply any more than an additional 50 pounds per acre. So you might look at 30, you might look at 40, but there's no need from what the research has shown to go beyond 50 pounds per acre. If you haven't put on all of your nitrogen yet and still have to side dress some additional nitrogen, make sure to side dress that amount, but then you may want to add a little bit more to that to account for some of the loss that might have taken place of the nitrogen that you have had out there already. But again, you probably wouldn't be looking at 50 pounds per acre. In this situation, you might be looking maybe more like 30 pounds or something like that. Again, it's really difficult to come up with recommendations on this, and it's a lot based on what your feel is and how you feel your fields are sitting nitrogen wise. In situations where you might have had a lot of nitrogen put out there and it's actually maybe excessive amount of nitrogen, you may consider backing down even more yet. And maybe you're looking at 20 to 30 pounds that you might put on, or you may even consider not putting on any additional nitrogen at all. One thing in the Iowa State information that they found during their research, and again, this will change with the cost of nitrogen and the commodity price for corn, is that they found 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre was the economical minimum amount of nitrogen to apply. So, and with that covers the slides that I wanted to run through. If I'd take any questions, if Christy or Hailey have any for me.
Well, thank you, Paul. Number one, it's really eye-opening again to see that precipitation and the heat units, because my first thought was, were we behind on heat units? Because we did have that cooler start, it seemed like, to June, and it's good to see that we're ahead on those in our area as well as the rain. So, I mean, I thought that chart was really good. So the other thing that I found interesting besides that slide was that I know that Hailey and you had mentioned the finding of that adult beetle earlier. What does that mean? Does that mean anything? Is it, I mean, just throwing that out there, I don't know, is that something they need to pay attention to spray, like if some of them are spraying insecticide, is there anything that they need to note or us to note when we're out scouting as far as when is it too much? What is the recommendation if they are out earlier? You mentioned seeing the Western, right?
Yeah.
Over the Northern.
Yeah, it was the Northern end.
Or Northern.
And it's maybe just a signal to start looking for them a little closer. When I put finding that beetle and compared it to my charts, it was maybe 5 days early.
Okay.
So pretty close to when I thought the adult hatch might be starting. So it's just a sign that we need to start looking.
Okay, so another question that I had for the rootworm, and Hailey, maybe you can talk about this too, is we've been doing some rootworm digs here, and I know last week was wet for us. We didn't get out there probably as much as we would like to have, but so far we're not seeing a lot. Or what have you been seeing from the?
No, I think the most we have seen in a field, and this was on 4 digs in the field, because we found 7 on one, and so then we were like, but then we found 2 on another dig, and then I don't know what it was. I can't do my math at the moment, but anyways, basically the most we've seen in a field for our digs, and that was with extra samples just to double check, because it was a big field and there were different, there was a competitor and then some of ours seed on there and things like that, was 9. And so other than that, I think back there when I looked at what they did yesterday, there's maybe been a couple, but there's also a lot of fields that haven't seen much. And something that I think is really interesting, and Paul and I have kind of had a conversation about some of this just recently, was that he was with his chart with the degrees, the soil temperature, and like he was wondering, maybe is that going to affect our populations for this year and things like that. And he had said, I guess, Paul, you can also say too, but he had said that it was it made sense with what he had seen in his chart for the soil temperature versus what we're seeing right now. Because like we've have a couple of fields that have had corn on corn for 7 years. And Hailey and we had some corn that was down. We had a storm recently. And so she had messaged me and was like, do you think this is wind? Like, what do you think's going on? And so then I said, how long, like, how many years has there been corn? 5 years. We were just starting our digs. So I thought, well, let's see what our float is. And we had no corn rootworm, like in those floats that we did on that field. And so it was likely just really wet soils because the plant was having a hard time anchoring. They just pulled the corn right out of the field. It was kind of crazy. And so it was the weather, wind, lack of anchoring.
And that's a good point, the wetness, because at the time that the larvae were going through their peak egg hatch, we were also very rainy at that time. And so over the years, when we've had, I talked about how farmers can do a lot of things to try to manage corn rootworms, but it's actually Mother Nature that actually does the real resets for us. And that comes from the environment. So like I mentioned before, this year was a little bit of an oddity with the cold soil temperatures that we don't normally get that cold, where I think we might have actually had a little bit of an impact on the corn rootworm egg population here. But I think that we oftentimes have a much larger impact on the corn rootworm population during their egg hatch time. And what we end up seeing with that is if we get a lot of rain as they're hatching, so prior to the eggs hatching, the eggs can tolerate being in saturated soil and it doesn't hurt them. But as soon as those eggs hatch and you got the little larvae out there, they need oxygen. And if they're in saturated soil, they are not going to last. And so it's always kind of it's kind of a good and bad thing. So a double-edged sword type situation. You don't like to have your crops in saturated soils, but saturated soils help knock back the corn rootworm population if it's at the right time. So anyway, I do think that with that timing there, that again, and that's what you guys were finding in your root digs, was that you were not finding a lot of larvae. You were finding some, but you weren't finding a lot. And in years where we had a lot of corn rootworms out there, the root digs would yield 20, 30, 40 larvae per root ball. So, if you're only finding 7 and you're really searching, and to find 7, things are knocked down pretty decent. I'm not going to say that that's any rule that you can follow or anything like that, but it is an indication anyway.
Yeah.
So I have a question just on the traits, Paul, and having Smart Stacks Pro, having the VT4 out there in our area, especially over the last, heavier in the last 2 years, has that also helped with that population, do you think, or is that more just preventive
Well,
in the season? You know what I'm saying? Does that knock any of that down since they're, hopefully getting killed off?
oh, sure.
As-
It is an additive. So, especially with the addition of the RNAi technology in the SmartStax Pro and the VT4 Pros, they're helping to kill off larvae as well. So, things that might have survived Mother Nature and made it through, found an air pocket or something to survive, as they feed on the roots there, if they're in that, we're having more larvae dying from there. So that's also helping take the population down. So the whole combination is really helping.
Yeah, because I think over the last 2 years, we've been probably 60-40. We've been heavier on the VT4, on the RNI technology, like you're saying, between the two SSP and the VT4, as far as traits that are coming out of Lammers Ag. So I just wanted to, that's always good to note that, because again, I'm gonna say it again. We're coming out with our, our fourth mode here soon. It'll in a couple of years, we hope. But again, it's another, reason why I think it's exciting to see what Bayer's coming up with, for continuous rootworm technology and resistance.
Yeah, we have to really be on top of the game with things like that, even with the water hemp that we've been seeing and talking about. And like, okay, things build a resistance quite quickly. It just takes one mutation and then boom, population can spread across an area. So keeping ahead of that and changing management strategies is important.
Right. So Hailey, I got a question for you, since Leaftech has kind of been on your radar right from the get-go when you started with Lammers Ag. I know that, we talk all the time about the different measurements that this takes, and obviously nitrogen, when Paul talks about nitrogen now, and with the rain, we've been out taking samples. I know, again, we're still learning on this whole technology. What have you done at this point to talk about Leaftech as far as the data is concerned?
Yeah, so we've had growers contact us and have us come out, and then with those fields, I'm sending out actual tissue samples to test against to test the accuracy of the Leaftech, and I'm kind of working with the people that work at Leaftech on some of this stuff and just collecting the data and just keeping things pretty organized with that. And then I also have some trials. One that I'm specifically really excited about is a grower. He actually did different, when he was applying nitrogen, I think it was in April or something like that. He did different rates across an area in the same area of the field. And so I went out there, and the lowest amount that was applied and the highest amount that was applied. Now I need to run statistics on this and look at the standard error and things like that. They were roughly the same. And then the meat, like the next, so there's the highest and then medium high, that had the highest amount of nitrogen, percent nitrogen content in that leaf. And then the other two were about the same, actually. And so I'm looking at that. I think that that's something really good that I can follow up, and it's practical because most people use this type of nitrogen strategy. I'm also looking into some other microbial things, but this one I think will be most beneficial to most of our growers. So yeah, I took those samples and sent them off. I'm going to keep an eye on this field, and also the grower and I both noticed that on the higher end of things, the corn was a little bit shorter. Now this could be there could be a lot of variables going into this, but then in the two, so where the percent nitrogen content for, it was like, we'll call it the medium range of what was applied. They were very similar, and they were actually taller and darker green. So I think that it's interesting because it can really give us a peek. Like, you know, we were talking with Paul and how the weather and precipitation can really change what we do for our nitrogen strategy and things like that, and being able to adapt to it. But I think that sometimes like less can be more, and it can save you money. And so I'm kind of going to hone in on that, and I guess we'll see. And I'm be excited to compare.
There's always that threshold
across the season. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, like, and Paul can talk to this more too, but on nitrogen, you know, we always think we put on more, and really you're not, the plant's only taking up so much, you know, so it's not necessarily the best spend on money, but I think it's kind of like putting a warm blanket on, you know, you feel good about it. So that'll be interesting to see, because I know even in my days with Pivot, you know, they showed plants at over 200 pounds, you know, on 160, and then just different ways that the nitrogen was added, and there was no benefit to go over. I think it was 200 pounds on that example that they had showed. So it'll be good. I think the thing that I'm excited about with the Leaftech, and when you say you're sending in soil samples, I just want to make sure and verify, because I think you maybe missed saying that the Leaftech folks are, number one, phenomenal to work with. John and his team, it's a family owned company. They are vested in making sure that this tool is something that the farmer can use. And when we're sending those samples in, those leaf tissue, as well as soil samples, and they're like, send as many as you want, we'll pay for it. They're validating with 3 other separate labs on the accuracy of that data off of what we're getting in the field right here in, you know, in Butler, Grundy counties, Bremer County. So again, we are learning about this, you guys, but if this is something on nitrogen that you see that you're worried about, that things are looking not great in your fields, please call Hailey or myself. We are happy to come out and do some scans for you. The more information that we can get for Leaftech, the better off we're going to know exactly how this is all going to play out for next year. I did also think about this when I was out. I do a lot of thinking on the boat. I know, wow, I'm on vacation, but I do a lot of thinking on the boat, and I thought, you know, even if a customer wouldn't, or a farmer wouldn't apply some of the things that we're seeing this year, does that build for next year for them on what it looks like? And so always grabbing data is, you know, number one, great, but just to know that this data is verified. It's not, oh, they're just, you know, it's just something in the wind. No, these guys are very much into accuracy, and very much into, if this is not correct, we will fix it, and we will make sure that this tool is an asset.
Well, so I was looking at what, like, some, you know, I've reached out to some people that I was that use some similar technology, not exactly that, and they pointed me to Purdue, and Purdue is not working directly with Leaftech, but they are working with a scanner that does just this. And so I've been kind of digging into that, and have an email out to one of their people just to kind of like learn more about the technology behind it and things like that, because the last thing, you know, we just really want to make sure that we're giving everyone accurate data. And a lot of it comes down collecting it accurately on healthy leaf tissue and things like that too within the plant.
Right. So, and it is a tool. Again, it's not something that's in, you know, rocket science of, wow, we're, you know, that we're saying to do this, but I'm looking forward to seeing some of those results, to see if they match at the end of the year when we get the yields and we get the numbers that we see, you know, when the crop is harvested. So I mean, nitrogen, Paul, I mean, obviously we've had a lot of wet weather. I'm really going to be interested. I'm going to throw this out there too, because I still do have Pivot Bio out there. We will do those checks, especially now, because that is 40 pounds, you know, that whether or not, so that should be there. We should be seeing that ahead of a commercial, if it was in an area where that might be a possibility. So we will be checking that and getting back with you on that. I made a note on that. That's a good follow-up from what Paul's slides had. Yeah. To make sure that, you know, I'm not selling Pivot. I've never sold Pivot on yield. I've sold Pivot on 40 pounds of nitrogen. That's how I sell it. So if it is showing up again on a year where we got a lot of rain in a short amount of time, and maybe some of the other stuff leached, then that's a great thing for us to know. So, that's another side note that we will follow back up with our growers on and with you all here at Rooted in Results. So is there anything else you guys?
Yeah, I'll add one more
Paul?
thing on the
Okay.
nitrogen side.
Yep.
And it's kind of a timing thing. So, and this has just been kind of a experience thing more than anything, but when it comes time to adding some extra nitrogen there, my own experience is that you want to get it done. If you're going to do so, you want to get it done before tasseling, and that's coming up in a hurry. So, and it's always great to get in front of a rain as well to get it in the ground, but that's just been my experience. I just want to share that out. I guess another maybe interesting observation is that with all the rain that Butler County's had, I'm surprised. There's spots of yellow corn, especially where water stood and things like that. But I'm really surprised at the number of fields that actually look nice and even and have good green color. But that can also be kind of on the surface of what you're seeing there, and in the field you might actually see the nitrogen deficiency starting to work its way up. And another observation that I'll share with that is that the plant is also sloughing off leaves, so it'll actually pull nutrients back out, and so you can actually see nutrient deficiencies. Now you might see nutrient deficiencies showing up that might not really be a real nutrient deficiency. It's actually that the leaves sloughing off, and so you want to take a look higher up in a plant there, maybe be 3 or 4 leaves off the ground there. And if you're seeing nitrogen deficiency showing up, then you can feel pretty confident that plant's signaling that it's probably a little short, even though the rest of the plant is going to be nice and green, because it'll actually move the nitrogen from those lower leaves to the upper leaves.
Okay, well, thank you guys both for being with me here. Again, I'm in Canada, so I will be back soon, and I'm sure the corn has grown quite a bit since I've been gone. But I just really love to do these mid-season updates. So appreciate both you guys being here, and stay tuned for the next one.
This podcast is produced by Spin Market and Digital. Located in Fort Dodge, Iowa, Spin Market's highly skilled team can help you increase your market by updating your website, improving SEO, designing advertisements, and producing podcasts that will grab the attention of your market. Contact Spin Market today for all your digital marketing needs at digitalagent@spinmarket.com or call us at 515-302-8026. And to learn more, visit our website at www.spinmarket.com. That's digitalagent@spinmarket.com or 515-302-8026. Or visit our website at www.spinmarket.com.